Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You're here for the Pulled from All Sides, the Sandwich Generation at Work webinar. This webinar is part of our Return to Work, Stay at Work series. We're glad to have you here today. My name is Tanya Hyde, and I'll be managing the webinar today. I'm the project manager with the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability. And this webinar is made possible through the support of the Community Grants Program through the BC government, as well as through donations and memberships. We'd also like to thank Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation, for releasing the research article this presentation is based on for open access so that all of you can access the article after the presentation. As for who's online today, as I mentioned, I'm Tanya, and I'll be managing the technical portion of the session today. And we also have online Karen Jacobs from the Work Journal, and she'll be moderating the session and also handling the Q&A session at the end. And our speaker today is Anne O'Sullivan. So I'm going to hand it over to Karen. She's going to do a little introduction of the Work Journal, as well as introduce today's speaker.
Thank you. I'm Karen Jacobs. I'm coming to you from Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts. I am also the founding editor of the journal Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation. I'm very proud to say that our journal has been in existence for 25 years, and we just published our 50th volume. I'm thrilled to be working with the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability, and I thank you for hosting today's event. So, we are going to have a wonderful presentation and discussion by Anne O'Sullivan. She is from the Family Caregiver Support Program in Southern Maine Agency on Aging in Scarborough, Maine. So, Anne, welcome. Looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me join you today. I'm going to talk about sandwich generation caregivers who are also employed. So we're thinking, when we talk about sandwich generation, we're talking about people who are both raising children and assisting older adult family members. And this is a population that's really at risk for issues related to physical and emotional health, concerns with balancing work and family responsibilities, and for taking care of themselves. And while we use the term sandwich generation, right before the webinar, Karen reminded me that there's also people who are the club sandwich generation, or I've heard them called the Whopper generation, where there's another generation involved in addition to parents and children, either that people are assisting grandparents or are assisting grandchildren as well, so they have that extra layer. But we're going to focus pretty much on just the sandwich generation, thinking about what's the situation and the challenges involved, what are some of the potential negative effects that compounded stressors might lead to, what are some strategies that employers and the individuals themselves might engage to create a sustainable work and caregiving situation. So I want to just define a couple of terms. We explained what what sandwich generation caregivers are. Family caregivers is a term used to describe unpaid family and friends who are assisting a person who needs help with routine activities. As our population ages and people are living longer with chronic health conditions, it's increasingly likely that the person receiving help is going to be an older adult. In many cases, their adult children are serving as their caregivers. The most recent numbers I read is, at least in the U.S., that 36% of caregivers are assisting a parent, and of those, 41% are also raising their own children. When we talk about the sandwich generation, we have to have in mind that almost half of adults in their 40s and 50s have a parent age 65 or older and are either raising a young child or, in this economy, supporting a grown child. Not all these people are actually providing care to the older adult, but it is just to give a sense of the scope of the potential problem. And because of all these multiple life demands, this is really an at-risk population. Nearly 60% of people who were caregivers in the past 12 months are also currently employed, and most of them work full-time. And 74% of caregivers indicate that at some point in their caregiving career they were also employed. As of 2011, 7% of employed men and women, which is almost 10 million people in the U.S., are caring for both their children and their aging parents. And we can expect these numbers to increase as people have children later, as life expectancy increases, and as the average age of our population goes up. Research shows that caregivers experience more stress than non-caregivers, and that elder care produces more psychological strain than child care. There's a number of meta-analyses that show how elder care impacts caregiver health and well-being, especially their psychological health. And actually an article just came out in The Psychologist this month addressing that. Most family caregivers face stressors at points in their caregiving careers, and that could be emotional stressors. People feel guilty. I have yet to meet a caregiver who didn't say at some point, I wish I could be doing more. And sometimes they're doing a great deal already. Caregivers experience depression. Being a caregiver puts you at risk for isolation. There's also the relationship changes. If I am taking care of a parent, there's a real shift in the balance in our relationship, particularly if I need to take on more of a decision-making role. Likewise, if I'm taking care of a spouse, there's a shift in the balance, and it can cause a lot of stress for people. There's the whole physical issues. If I'm an employee and I'm providing care and I'm raising children, I'm tired. So people experience fatigue, health issues, and even if I have my own underlying health issues, there may be some impact on my physical ability to actually provide needed care. There's also the environmental challenges. People are often living in an environment that doesn't facilitate making care easy. There's the time constraints. Particularly if, depending on the person's needs that I'm helping, how often do I need to see them? Do they need help more than once a day? How far away are they? And then all the competing demands of my home, my family, my community, potentially a social life. We're going to talk about each of these. So sandwich generation employees face a lot of challenges in balancing their lives. There's the work challenge, and many sandwich generation employees say that they are stressed about how their caregiving responsibilities and their work fit together, and they are concerned how their caregiving may be impacting their jobs. There's the demand of providing the care itself, the elder care. There's the demand of parenting. So raising children while you're employed has a lot of stressors on its own. But parenting while also working and assisting older adult family members can really exacerbate or create additional concerns for these caregivers. All these demands can have an impact on spousal relationships. And then there's all these other life demands. Families may be experiencing grief and sadness over loss of health or independence for the person receiving the care, as well as losses of routine, leisure activities, and relationships, and the fear of an unknown future. Caregivers can feel caught among the emotional needs of children, spouses, the older adult, all of whom may be asking for more attention from the caregiver, and then also the expectations of employers. Being a working member of the sandwich generation is the source of compounded concerns about finances, saving for retirement, home ownership, paying college costs, and the availability of family time. I also put two competing demands on here of leisure and self-care, and the reason I put question marks after them is that in my experience, when people are having all these other competing demands, those are the first two things that fall by the wayside. And of course, those are some really key things for your own well-being and for managing in a stressful situation. But it's usually what people decide they don't have time for first, taking care of themselves and having some sort of an enjoyable leisure time social life. We know a lot about how stress can have a negative impact on people. And certainly managing a multitude of priorities can be stressful. Stress can be a motivator. Stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. It can get us to get up and move and do something. But when it's unmanaged, there's a lot of well-documented potential negative effects. So it can contribute to physical symptoms like muscle tension and aches, digestive problems, high blood pressure, heart disease, headaches, insomnia, and actually lowered immunity. Emotionally, people under stress can feel angry and anxious and depressed and irritable, can have trouble concentrating and difficulty making decisions, and can really start experiencing some feelings of hopelessness. Behaviorally, we see people experience unmanaged stress and try to manage it with increased use of alcohol, nicotine, or caffeine. We also may see an impact on job performance, withdrawal from relationships, and just general difficulties in meeting responsibilities in life. So what does that mean for employers? Studies have shown that caregiving employees who are juggling multiple demands can cost U.S. businesses as much as $34 billion each year. Just a pretty impressive number. And there's a few ways that there's a cost to employers. One is that people miss work, absenteeism. And then people's workday may be disrupted. They may be receiving calls during the day because the person they're assisting has some needs. They may have to leave suddenly for something. Some people decide not to work as many hours or to take a less demanding job in order to achieve a better balance. There's the concept of presenteeism, which is the employee is at work, but they're really preoccupied with something else. So they're there physically, but mentally they're working on something else. And should caregivers choose to leave their jobs, there's the cost to employers of replacing employees and also losing the value of the expertise, the experience, and the institutional memory that these workers bring to the table. We also know that should caregivers choose to continue to work, it may become more difficult for them to provide the assistance that their care recipient needs. So there's a lot of at stake on all sides. We also know that caregiver stress can contribute to employer health costs. So there is some additional research has shown that caregiving employees can cost employers more for health care related to issues of stress-related medical conditions, people not getting the preventive care that they need, often because they don't have time, people not getting treatment that they need in a timely way because they're so busy or stressed, and then health risk behaviors such as alcohol or substance misuse or tobacco use. So if we can address some of the root causes of this stress, we can really anticipate reducing these costs and improving employee health. So here are some ideas that we can think about as far as employers go. We know that if an employer responds to the elder care needs of their employees, they can see a reduced cost and improve employee retention. Back in the 1970s, a lot of employers moved towards offering child care related benefits to working parents, recognizing it was a way to reduce turnover and absenteeism. Because what they really wanted was to retain those good employees and help them make it work. So that thinking can now be applied to elder caregiving employees, particularly those in the sandwich generation. Looking ahead, 51% of the workforce expects to take on new family caregiving responsibilities in the next 5 years. So we know this is a problem that is not going away. And a MetLife study showed that benefits are an important mechanism which often employers seem to underrate that support the business goals of attracting, retaining strong employees and supporting their productivity. Employees who are satisfied with their benefits are more likely to be satisfied with their jobs. So let's think about how that might translate to how employers might address needs around sandwich generation employees. One of the first things that employers can do is get some sort of a needs assessment. What do these employees feel would be helpful? Whether that's through survey or focus group, but really get some sense of what are the unmet needs that their staff are experiencing. perhaps organizing some sort of committee or task force around work and family issues, looking at existing benefits and policies through the lens of how might this be helpful for family caregivers of older adults and sandwich generation caregivers. What do we already have that would be good for them? And then make sure employees know about that. Another is to train managers and supervisors about caregiving issues. We're going to discuss those last two a little further in a couple of minutes. So thinking about current benefits, while additional employer-paid elder care benefits could be put into place, it makes sense to first look at what's already there that could be helpful, if employees and supervisors are aware of them, or if maybe some adjustments are made in how they're delivered. Okay? So employee assistance programs, which is where people are offered some opportunity for some number of counseling visits about any work or life issues that they care to discuss. EAP programs can help caregivers identify supports and resources and also help them around issues of stress management. Flexible scheduling, the opportunity to do things like compressed work schedules or telecommuting, can all really help workers balance responsibilities. Personally, I worked full-time at this agency, 10 hours a day, 4 days a week for 9 years. And the point of that was when my mom turned about 85, she really needed a full day of my time every week, and that way I could do that, but still be available to my husband and small children on the weekend. And that's really what sustained the situation. So you can do the math. She passed away when she was 94, and until almost the end of her life, that schedule really supported my being able to help meet her needs and still balance the other important components in my life. Paid time off in some environments is offered as earned time or some other term, meaning that there's not a distinction made between sick and vacation time. If caregivers need to be helping with medical appointments and things like that, that can be very helpful. Employees can be allowed to use their sick time for caregiving for family members, including older adults and children. If pre-tax dependent care benefits are available, which are often around child care, the federal regulations allow those to be applied to elder care if people meet the eligibility for dependents. Group discounts could be negotiated with long-term care insurances, even if the employer is not making a contribution towards the premium. They can use the strength in numbers to help negotiate better prices, and where I work, you're able to include family members in that. And employers may have existing benefits aimed at employees who are raising children that can also be helpful to sandwich generation caregivers if they know about them. There's other low and no-cost supports that an employer might choose to put into place to make an elder care-friendly workplace. So one is just maintaining resource information on elder care, even things as simple as brochures for the local agency on aging. Perhaps this would be through the Human Resources Department or somewhere else that's very accessible to employees. A lot of employers offer periodic employee lunch and learns on topics related to elder care, resources, life balance. That can be a very cost-effective option. If employers are doing health and wellness fairs, including elder care resources as a part of that. Allowing people to use the phone or their internet during breaks and lunches to communicate regarding child and elder care can be very helpful. And it's important that employees understand that this is acceptable and also know what expectations and limitations might be in there. But sometimes it's very hard for someone, particularly if they're working full-time, to make those calls to the doctor or return those calls. And giving people a window in which they can do that can make it much easier. Making caregiver support groups available on site during non-work hours or giving information to employees about support groups off-site can be helpful. In some workplace climates, in my experience, people don't necessarily want to be like going to a lunchtime support group. They do much better with a lunch and learn class thing. And if people don't feel entirely safe, particularly if there's been any turmoil at work, Sometimes they don't want to appear to not be able to cope and have to go to a support group. So even just having the information available so that they could do that off-site in a place that felt more comfortable to them can be a huge help. Wellness programs can be a great part of the workplace resources and be a way to help sandwich generation caregivers improve on their self-care. They've been shown to not only help reduce costs and improve productivity, but they can also help improve employee retention. Employees who participate in wellness programs are more likely to report loyalty to their employer and perceive that their employer is more loyal to them, which I find very interesting. They're also more likely to say that benefits are a reason that they remain with their employer. So the wellness programs can address a lot of areas that are particularly relevant to sandwich generation caregivers, which may not only reduce employer health-related costs, but improve the retention if those employees need to make work versus life choices. So opportunities include things like stress management and reduction. So it could be exercise programs, it could be relaxation programs, assistance to stop or reduce negative health behaviors, so things like a program to help someone quit smoking. On-site medical screening for people who don't have time to go get those screening tests done, making it very easy for them to do some basic self-care around their own health. Health coaching, training in things like time management and priority setting, which can be useful in terms of work skills, but also in terms of balancing the work, family, leisure, other demands in somebody's life. Another important element can be supervisor training. There was actually a fairly recent survey from NSCW when caregivers were surveyed about changes they would like to see in how workplaces support them. One of the top choices was for more understanding of their situation from management. And that same article that came out this month in The Psychologist about elder care and work noted that in their research, which took place in the UK, although workers take less time out of work for elder care than they do for child care, supervisors perceive elder care to be more disruptive. And they theorized that this might have been related to the fact that child care demands tend to be somewhat consistent, other than if you get a call that you've got a sick child. You know, certain things are sort of routine in the schedule, whereas elder care absences may be brief, but they tend to come up a little more suddenly. And in some cases, somebody is out for a few days because of an immediate need. So another important step in making a workplace caregiver and sandwich generation friendly is supervisor training. And it's certainly important that managers at all levels are aware of and comply with any work-life policies that the organization has. But it's particularly significant with supervisors and middle management who are generally responsible for things like assignments, approving leave, making schedules, making decisions about promotions. In the U.S., the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is EEOC.gov, has detailed information about employer best practices with caregivers, which could really serve to inform some employer policy making. So as part of an at-risk population, what could individual sandwich generation employees do to better cope with all these competing demands? One thing is to connect with local resource points to learn what kind of help might be available. Now in the U.S., the Administration on Aging has the Elder Care Locator, which is eldercare.gov, which can direct people to the local agency on aging anywhere in the country. So as a first stop, where do I go? Another key strategy for sandwich generation caregivers is learning to ask for help and learning to accept help when it's offered. People are often willing to assist, but they often don't know what you need. So I always encourage people to keep a little list of things that if somebody comes up to you and says, how could I help? You can pull out your list and say, well, you know, here's 6 things. Does any of these look like something you could offer me? There's also free internet sites that allow caregivers to set up pages where people can be invited into the group. They can get updates on a person's situation, and they can also check a list of what kind of help is needed. They can sign up what day they're going to drop off a meal. They can ask for many different kinds of help, and it allows people to sort of go and do that on their own schedule when they feel they have a minute to offer something. It's also important to remember that assistance doesn't have to be related to providing care to the older adult. It might mean dropping off a meal, weeding the garden, mowing the lawn, giving somebody, picking up kids from soccer, giving somebody a ride somewhere. So it's anything that might reduce the demands on that sandwich generation caregiver employee's time. Another important strategy for the employee is to set priorities and accept that none of us can do everything. So learning to say no is a key. I have a colleague who reminded me at one point a few years ago, and I've reminded myself many times since, no is a complete sentence. Another is to start incorporating self-care into daily routines, whether it's exercise or eating better, getting socialization and leisure time, because those are the things that often fall victim when there are a lot of competing responsibilities. It's also important to help children cope if there's somebody receiving care in the grandparent or great-grandparent generation, to be honest with them, to listen to their concerns, and to answer their questions. It's really helpful to stick to routines for kids and make sure that some special time is being scheduled together with them, which can help them feel less stressed, which is also going to have a positive impact on the caregiving employee. And inviting children to help if care is being provided. Is there some way they could participate in that? It's a great way to bring them into the picture. The other is to inform supervisors and coworkers about the situation and problem solve with them about ways to continue to be an effective employee while parenting and caregiving. So managing multiple priorities of paid employment, raising children, providing help to an older adult family member is all a core of daily life for sandwich generation employees. There are a lot of strategies that caregivers and employers can use to help make this situation sustainable and to help prevent negative health consequences for the caregiver. A lot of new studies continue to show that effective employer interventions need not be complicated or expensive, but can still have a powerful impact. And community services and resources are also available to support sandwich generation family caregivers in maintaining their wellness at home and in the workplace. I put together a list of resources that I thought all had some very strong information on them. Some of them are organizations from the U.S., some of them are some studies that were done. MetLife has done, and World at Work has done a number of studies about employee sandwich generation caregivers and Pew Social Trends as well. On any of these websites, rather than trying to give you a long URL to track down a particular article, I just listed at the bottom here what are some of the search terms that I found took me to really strong additional information. And I'm going to give you, that's my contact information. Please do feel free. That's a U.S. phone number. It is toll-free anywhere in the U.S. And also that's my email. And do please feel free to email me if you have questions or comments or great ideas. And I think I'm turning it back over to you, Karen.
Oh, thank you, Anne. That was so interesting. And this article and what you discussed resonates so much with me. As you mentioned, I'm a club sandwich. I have 4 grandchildren, 3 children, 2 are married, so that makes it 5. And an older mom who's 88. And I work full-time and do a whole bunch of other things. So many of the strategies that you discussed were really important. So I want to encourage our attendees to please post some questions that we can pose to Anne. So Anne, as I'm waiting for people to post some questions, one of the topics that you mentioned was presentism, which I think that, what?
Presenteeism.
Presenteeism. Yeah, I never pronounced that correctly for some reason. That's really very interesting. One person asked, could you put back up the last 2 slides? They want to be able to copy down the resources. And just to let you know that this has been videotaped and it will be made available to you. So if you didn't get all of this immediately and did put those back up, you'll be able to get them with the video. So back to that concept, do you think that we're seeing it more with this sandwich or club sandwich generation, or is it something that's becoming more pervasive in the workplace? And I don't know if you can answer that, but what do you think about that?
I don't have any information to back it up. It would seem to me that as there are more and more life demands and distractions in general, probably we're seeing more people who are somewhat distracted at work. But I do think particularly when it's people worrying about and trying to make plans to meet the needs of people that they love, that becomes particularly preoccupying.
Yes.
More than, who am I getting a text from? And so I don't know whether that, are you thinking that it may just be a function of life becoming busier and more complicated?
Yes, I'm thinking that because we've published articles in Work on this topic, and also interruptions too in general, which could be what is distracting people or preoccupying them, seems to be again on the rise. And I don't know if it's more with this population, or are we seeing this in different workplaces because of just the general demands of work now?
It's a great question. I don't know what the right answer is, but it certainly would make sense that we might be seeing that across the board in some cases.
Yes, I think it may be, and any of you who are out there, anybody studying this concept or know anything about it, that would be great if you could post that. So a question that we have here is, can Anne talk about differences between small businesses versus larger organizations? And I'm assuming that the question is related to what resources might be there and how employers in smaller versus larger organizations might be responding to this concern.
And I can probably talk to that from a point of view of our experience here locally. It's not something I've done a lot of reading about because we do have some employers in this area who are large employers and are perhaps even connected to larger corporations that cover multiple states. And then we do also have a number of small businesses. In some cases, some of the larger employers, in my experience, have gotten the elder care on their radar and may be contracting with some of the larger that offer elder care consultation to employees. There are some national organizations, some national companies that provide EAP consultation around elder care. I don't see the smaller businesses in our area tapping into those so much. I find them more likely to call the Agency on Aging or to have resources available about local resources instead. It may get on a larger corporation's radar more quickly in terms of what's going on in the human resources literature. But if you're working for a small employer, there's also the fact that people get to know what's going on in each other's lives. And so there may be a accommodation that just kind of builds in a smaller workplace that might be a little harder to find in a larger workplace. I'd be very fascinated to know if there has been some studying done on what the differences are in those. I'm not familiar with it, but it's not something I've looked into closely.
Yeah, that's an interesting response, and I think, boy, that could be such a great research project for someone to do. So the person who posted it, I don't know if you have something else that you'd add, or if that's something you've studied. So let's see who else is posted right now. So we've got another question here, and this one is, let me read this, when taking into consideration that most employers and supervisors are part of the baby boom generation in general, why are they not as receptive of elder care versus child care? What a good question.
It's a great question. And I wouldn't say across the board that people aren't receptive. I know that I have talked with many caregivers who feel concerned that if they let their supervisor know that they're struggling, that will somehow have a negative impact on their work situation. I have worked with many supervisors in my generation and other generations who have been terrific about understanding and trying to help find that balance and trying to help accommodate. So I don't know. I wouldn't want to generalize that people aren't being understanding, but my sense is that there's a large room for improvement, and certainly in some work environments where people are really sort of not expected to have a life outside of work. And I do hear concerns that people don't feel that their managers are understanding of what this demand really looks like.
And thank you for that response. And again, attendees, please post your questions. You got a nice thank you for that response. So Anne, let me ask a question too. So perhaps some of the attendees today want to approach their employer. Do you have some tips that people could use in how to really verbalize their need to be able to have perhaps extra time, job sharing, whatever it is? Is there, some buzzwords that you'd use or ways of phrasing things that might be, helpful for people?
Well, that's a great question. I personally think it's always helpful to go into these discussions with the mindset of, I really want to keep working here and I really like what I'm doing and I'm really committed to doing this well. Here are some other things that are going on that I'm trying to sort out, and I'd like your help in figuring out how we might make this work. And I think it's really important to frame it of, it's important to me that I'm doing this job and doing it well, but there are other competing demands. And to go in armed with some ideas that are really workable. If I want a job share and I want to propose that, I think it would make sense for me to kind of think through how that might really look. And so not just say, oh, I'd like to job share, but sort of make a proposal of this is how this might work, and this is why it might be reasonable to get somebody to take the other half of this. But to really frame it in terms of, I want this to work for everybody. I want it to work for the person I'm caring for. I want it to work for my family. I want it to work for my employer. And it needs to work for me. So really that problem-solving, collaborative approach, I think, as a supervisor, I always find very helpful when somebody comes in and says, here's my concern and here's some thoughts I've had about it, as opposed to, here's my concern, fix it for me. So I think that can be a very helpful approach, and being open with people about the fact that you have these things going on in your life, just so that they're not, they understand that there's other demands out there, and odds are good they either have or will experience it themselves at some point.
Thanks, Anne. That really was helpful. And I think people listening to this webinar will take away different ways of framing what they ask that they need, and to really better beforehand prepare because I think there's a bit of reluctance on people's part. They're nervous, as you mentioned in your presentation. We've got another question. This question is this on the radar screen of labor and union contracts?
It actually is. And I am not going to be able to pull out of my brain what are some of the various, if you start Googling, some of these elder care things show up in labor and union contracts 20 years ago. In the 80s, there was some motion in this direction with some of the large unions. I'm thinking the Postal Service was one that, I'm trying to dig deep now because it's been a long time since I looked at those, that the Postal Service had written a lot of guidelines, and some of the other really large unions had included what they thought was appropriate in terms of employee support around elder care. And it was also, when child care was becoming more of a forefront issue with employers, and how can we help make this work? Because the bottom line is you don't want to lose a good employee. And if we can help somebody be a successful employee and make these balances and stay healthy and keep working with us, that's just wonderful for everyone. But yes, some of the larger unions have put this in, and I'm sure Googling it will get you all kinds of stuff. And it certainly, and the EEOC guidelines can really be used as a model for what they are terming best practices relating to employee caregivers.
Thanks, Anne. That was really helpful. One person asked if they could have you put your slides back on your email address. So I'm sure they want to be in touch with you. Perfect. Perfect.
Oh, great.
You know, Anne, we don't have any other questions posted, but I'm wondering if there's some additional information that you want to share, because the article that was published in Work was a sounding board article, which is, more of an editorial. So obviously this is a very important area and passionate to you. Are there some last thoughts that you might have that can be, perhaps insightful for people listening to this presentation?
Ooh. Well, you were right that I wrote the commentary because it really is it's a key point for me, having not only lived it, but because working with the Family Caregiver Support Program, which is, in case people aren't familiar with it, in the U.S., the National Family Caregiver Support Program, which is supported through the Administration on Community Living through the Older Americans Act, is a program that's in every state and territory in the U.S. and is aimed at assisting unpaid family and friends who are helping either an older adult, which they say is 60 or over, or are assisting a person of any age if that person has some kind of dementia. And the point of the program nationally is to try to help family caregivers be able to continue to provide the help that these people need without becoming exhausted themselves. Back in 2000, when the Older Americans Act was reauthorized, the couple of things came to light. One was that family caregivers are providing something like 84% of the long-term care in the United States, and that if at that time, so almost 15 years ago, if family caregivers all said, okay, we're not doing it anymore, and paid people had to be brought in to provide the care, at that time it would have cost the U.S. $257 billion a year. So clearly some action was needed. Currently, the numbers I'm seeing are if we had to pay for the care that family caregivers provide for free, it would now be around $450 billion a year. So the idea of helping family caregivers continue to do this is one that's resonated for me for a long time. And I actually had the privilege of starting the program here at the Southern Maine Agency on Aging in 2001. But it also extends then, how do we help these caregivers who are also have these other many competing demands on them, and sort of find their way and provide the supports that they need so that they can keep doing what in most cases is something they very much want to do. I don't know if that got it.
Oh, thank you. That was
Aaron?
Yeah. Yes, because this is something near and dear to your heart, but what you also did was not only did you experience it, but you took action. So I want to challenge people who are on this discussion today or will listen to this asynchronously to think about how you can be an advocate for making changes. And even if at this point in your life you're not called, part of that sandwich generation or club sandwich generation or whatever else, you could be there to help other people. And perhaps in a few years you will be in that position and it can benefit you. So being an advocate, and that's why, Anne, I just, admire what you have done as an advocate and how you decided to write this sounding board article and work to really get the message out. So do you think it's hard to be an advocate? And, to be an advocate, what might you suggest as a first step that people can take?
Well, I think there's a variety of things we could think about, whether you're trying to be an advocate in your community or in your workplace, or certainly learning about what's currently available. Talking with in the U.S., and I know we may have people who are on who don't live in the U.S., talking with things like the local agency on aging in the U.S. to learn about what are some needs that might be addressed. Writing letters to the editor, highlighting issues facing family caregivers or employed caregivers or sandwich generation caregivers. Just, I think, heightening awareness is such an important thing to do. And then if you're someone who has the time and the energy, to also look at what might you do. Is there a volunteer opportunity that you might be able to step into to be supportive of family caregivers, of older adults, or working family caregivers? What are some options? And in the U.S., I would say the agencies on aging are a great first step for that because they have a high awareness of what's going on in the communities around them.
And I love all of those advocacy suggestions. I do want to, put in a plug for writing letters to the editor of newspapers. We have an assignment in one of my classes at Boston University where I have the students look at articles that are published in newspapers, local or even national ones, and they write letters to editors, and we have had many published. In fact, the American Occupational Therapy Association is going to feature one of the articles that was published that one of our Masters in Occupational Therapy students at BU submitted and got published, because it is a really important way of getting your message out there to a very broad audience. So I love that suggestion.
And we've done that. I've done that a number of times when there was something in the news that related to a family caregiving situation, to just highlight the fact that there are resources and supports for people, and that caregivers don't have to go it alone. And I've found that to be a very good opportunity because it's something that's already been sort of put on people's radar a little bit.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Anne, I think we'll conclude now. And again, if anybody has any questions, you can see the CIRPD website and email there. And Anne, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your passion for this very, very important issue. And everyone, thank you for joining us today.
And thanks for letting me join you.